I'm Megan. I've worked in museums for now almost 20 years. And I know people joke around about that and they say, oh, well, I started as a child. Well, I started as a teenager volunteering in museums. And I thought I was going to work mostly in art museums. But then I stumbled into a job at Boston Children's Museum and found that that was the place that I wanted to be, working with kids and families. Because I feel like you can do a lot more radical, interesting work in that context than in some of the other more traditional museum settings. And so my hope for today is that I can share a little bit about what I've learned from this thing called Playwork over the last about 6 or 7 years, and how it's influenced how I see children and how I see my work in museums as well. And I know it's very exciting. You've been doing this sort of survey of all different types of ways of being and trying to draw from other fields. And that's exactly what we've been doing. Playwork is another field for us that has become a pretty core part of our practice here at the museum. The New Children's Museum is an arts-based children's museum in San Diego. And when I say arts-based, I mean a few things. One, we're an unusual museum. We call ourselves a new model for children's museums. Our spaces include many studios. So we have a clay studio that is open every day and kids can use, and parents too, real clay to manipulate. We have spaces like our Innovators Lab with rotating workshops. Here kids are learning about turning wood by trying to turn candles. That was from an artist workshop. But one of the things that makes us very unique is that we don't really have exhibits. We have installations. So our museum is as if a contemporary art museum and a children's museum had a baby. So this is Wobble Land, which is by an artist named Marisol Rendon, and it's our toddler space. Kids can move the sculptures around, they can reposition them, they can throw those green balls up into the rafters and get them stuck up there. It's very open-ended. Throughout our museum, we have spaces like this. Every space has been created by an artist, either an artist in-house or an artist that's been commissioned. So this is a project called The Wonder Sound by the artist Wes Ambrose, who's in the picture with his wife. It takes a lot to get to a space like this, right? If we want to design for these guys, for kids, we actually need to start first with thinking about ourselves and where we're coming from. So that's where we're going to start today. I've been doing this exercise for the last 3 or 4 years, and it's kind of amazing how the results seem to be pretty similar about the spaces that we remembered enjoying. And you'll notice that I didn't say to map a space where you like to play. Because a lot of times when you say that, people will think, okay, I like to play soccer, or I'd like to play at the playground, or things like that. And all those are perfectly fine places to end up mapping. But our mind goes to places that were specifically designed for play. You might have remembered in your maps things like this. So maybe you use stuff in ways that stuff might not have been designed to be used. There might have been adults who were around, but not really around. They were nearby. Sometimes when I've done this exercise, people say, I don't know where my mom was, or I don't know where my grandma was, or I think she was inside somewhere. Or we would go, yesterday we did this mapping exercise with some of our staff, and she was saying, well, we'd go to the park, but then I don't know where my parents would go after that, you know? And they might have been there right nearby, but you lose kind of sight of where they are. Nobody's telling you what to do. And then the other thing that often comes up is that you were so into what you were doing that you lost track of time. So a lot of times people remember, I have no idea how long I stayed in my room playing that thing, but it seemed like I was in there for hours. These nicely map onto the definition of play that comes from Playwork, which I'll talk about today. So in the Playwork principles, which are 8 principles that guide playworkers in their practice, they define play as a process that is freely chosen, personally directed, is intrinsically motivated, You can poke holes in all of these points of the definition. And if you think back on your own maps, did you freely choose to be where you were? If you were at an after-school program, could you decide to leave if you wanted to? Maybe not. Was it personally directed? Maybe some of it was, but maybe those of you who had older brothers and sisters, maybe they were directing some of that play. Maybe you were the older sibling that was directing that play. Maybe you liked to be directed. In that case, it would be freely chosen that you were being directed by someone else. And then intrinsically motivated, some of you may know that term, but extrinsic motivation is something like, I come to work for a paycheck. So you were doing it for the sake of doing it. Now, an easier definition in the words of a kid is something like this. Play is what I do when everyone else stops telling me what to do. In many ways, play happens everywhere. Children will play anywhere that they are. The next time you're in an airport, watch kids in the airport, and they will play with the tiles, they will play with the chairs, they'll find any way to play in a space that's really not specifically designed for them to play. Playwork is a profession that emerged in the United Kingdom and in Japan and in Scandinavia, parts of Scandinavia. And it's now a profession that you can get your bachelor's degree in, your master's degree, and recently your PhD. So it's a highly skilled, trained profession. And one of the professors who teaches in this profession, Fraser Brown, talks about playwork as it's basically removing barriers to play and enriching the play environment. And then the role of the play worker is to create flexible environments which are substantially adaptable or controllable by the children. So it seems pretty simple and straightforward in many ways. And a play worker works to create conditions that are conducive to play. So whatever it was that you enjoyed as a child, most likely was your kind of play. And the play worker would be the person in your life who would try to help make those things happen. Now, everybody's play is different. When we mapped yesterday with the staff, one person remembered liking to play with her Barbies and would spend hours reimagining her Barbies, and she would use a keyboard that was in the room as the dance hall, and she'd have her Barbies go the dance place, and then the plant at the window was the park, and the Barbies would go to the park. So a play worker in that context would be making sure that that child had the time and the space and was allowed to put the Barbies in the plant if the Barbies wanted to go in the plant. What you're seeing in this image is an adventure playground in Wales. And that's where play work is often associated. So adventure playgrounds are spaces that are often kind of thought of as junk spaces, spaces where you might get leftovers. The play worker might help collect those things, and kids can manipulate those things however they want. This is another example from the Berkeley Adventure Playground. There are a few adventure playgrounds in the United States, and Berkeley is one of the oldest. Adventure playgrounds have come into the news lately. This is on The Daily Show recently, where a segment called Everything is Stupid. Ronnie Chang talked about adventure playgrounds and really, focused, like most people do, on why would kids want to play on a pile of rusty trash? That is not a picture of adventure playground in this image. That is actually a picture of a dump. But this question of why would we give kids hammers and nails when we could have such nicer things? Now, that's not really what adventure playgrounds or play work is about. Though play work did start in kind of an unusual spot. So this is an adventure playground in England in the 1960s. And these kinds of spaces and play work as a profession emerged out of something pretty tragic, which is the bombing of Europe during World War II. So after World War II in London and other parts of Europe, there were lots that lay vacant for years and years and years. And kids automatically found interesting uses for those spaces because they had lots of bits and bobs and loose parts. You could build forts. And some people in the community started noticing this in London and wanted to make sure that first you could clear the space of hazards so that there were no unexploded shells in these spaces. And they introduced this thing called a play leader. So the play leader would go to a site like that, set it up, maybe provide some food for the kids, some snacks, and would just be a resource for them. If somebody in the community had leftover lumber, they might go with a truck and collect that lumber and bring it to the site so the kids could build with it. Sometimes they get donations as large as an old cab that kids could then play in. So today, Playwork is still practiced on adventure playgrounds, both the ones in the United States, many in London. It's also practiced in other settings. So the top is the Land in Wales, an adventure playground. The one with the brick building is on Governor's Island in New York. So that's a playground that's been open for the summer for the last couple weekends, or couple summers. The bottom there is the Providence Play Corps, which is run by Janice O'Donnell, and it's AmeriCorps staff who go to regular built playgrounds, but they bring interesting loose parts and will hang out with kids. And then there's even a lot of play work that happens in hospitals with kids who might not be able to go to a space that has lots of nails and things like that in it. And so play work can happen on a really basic level. It's just responding to kids where they are. This is from the Eureka Villa Adventure Playground, which is an emerging adventure playground in California. And on the left, that's their space. They have this beautiful acre oak trees that kids can play on. But then they also do pop-up adventure playgrounds at this one, like the Autry Museum on the right. They did a big cardboard pop-up space. And so the play work is the same in both spaces. It's just a very different context. One of the things that's essential to play work is that you look at kids in a very different way than you might otherwise. You look at them with this unconditional positive regard, which is a term that comes from psychoanalysis. And you're trusting that the child has the agency to choose how to respond to a situation. And if we're really honest with ourselves, a lot of times we step into kids' situations before we really stop and think, can this kid do this thing? We're very concerned about protecting children. So for us, at the museum and in other contexts, it can be really simple. So in this image, this is this bookshelf area that was designed by one of our artists. And it's not really designed for climbing, though it looks really fun for climbing. And so you might sit there and watch a kid do something like this and think, do I go in and say no because the rules say you're not supposed to climb on it? Should I stop them from doing it? Or can she do it? Can she get through? And maybe I just don't say anything at that moment. Play work is all about it depends on the situation. And it's very hard to follow very specific rules to say you do this or you don't do this. It's all about the moment. Morgan Lecter-Saxby, who is a play worker who has been traveling across the United States last couple of years, sharing this idea of play work, kind of call her the Johnny Appleseed of play work. And she calls play work a third path. So it's not the straight and narrow, follow the rules. And it's not everything goes. So it's not, now you can do anything, because that's not the case. Kids can't do anything that they want in these spaces. It's somewhere in between that. It's not yes and, like an improv, which we talk about, but it's more of a yes if. So yes, you can climb through that bookshelf because I know that you're wearing shoes that aren't going to get caught up in it. And I know that there's some padding nearby, so if you fall, it's not going to be that big a deal. A lot of times when I've talked to people at children's museums, they'll say, like, well, we're all about fun. We're all about play. What we do is play in our museum. And we have to kind of examine that a little bit. It's the worst thing is, I think, when we use the phrase, oh, it's like cheese on the broccoli. We make learning fun by making it playful. And that could be okay sometimes. But there is this idea of playful learning as play as progress. The guy on the left there is Brian Sutton Smith, who is a play theorist. he is sort of famous. You may have heard this quote that play is not the opposite of work. Play is the opposite of depression. And sometimes it's attributed to Stuart Brown, who has a really great TED talk, but he's quoting Brian Sutton Smith. So that in play, you want to do more. In play, you feel like you have the capacity to seek more in your life. And when you're depressed, you want to do less. So if you think about play in that way, play is what makes us who we are. Play is what makes us happy. Play is what motivates us. But often we think of, play as how children learn. So when we look at a child in a pretend veterinarian's office and the child is pretending to administer something to this dog, we say, oh, look, she's playing at what it might be like to be a veterinarian someday. Now, she might be doing that, or she might be just figuring out how to jab this puppy with something. We always make it, how do we instrumentalize play so that we can show that it's helping to socialize kids towards a future career? But play is just what makes us who we are. So in our museum, we're trying to move away a little bit from the cheese on the broccoli. And I don't really have a good metaphor yet for what's the opposite of cheese on the broccoli. I think roasted broccoli tastes pretty good. I just didn't really like steamed broccoli as a kid. So I'm not sure what that is, but rather than trying to pretend to hide some kind of learning in a playful package, what if we really think about play itself? Here's a little thought exercise. When we think about fun and flexibility and our own hidden biases maybe in a museum. In the farmer's market, you think about one of the fruits or vegetables, if it moves out of the market and goes to the next exhibit over, and a kid's playing with it there. Now, we might be okay with that, we're gonna let that go for a little while, especially if it's interesting. At Boston Children's Museum, there was a grocery store exhibit, and then a floor down was the Arthur's World exhibit based on the book series, Arthur, the aardvark. And I would love it when I'd see fruits and vegetables from the market that had made their way down to the kitchen in Arthur's World. Because it just seemed there was a narrative there they're following. They went shopping, they had to get the groceries, they went back down to the kitchen, and they made their food. But eventually, we would always take the food back. We take the lemons back. We might then say, well, actually, I think that this means that we need a little bit more play food in this space, so let's add some more here. So that might happen. But let's say a kid takes the lemon and decides to take a Sharpie from another space, an art space, and start drawing on the Sharpie. That's where we're kind of like, whoa, that's a little bit too much. And so, thinking about what is really flexible about our environments, what can be adapted and controlled by children, and adapted and controlled on a large scale or on a small scale, what can really be shifted? And Playwork is about thinking about that. And it's not all at once. We've made some incremental changes. And children's museums are really good at playful learning. That's kind of what we're known for. And when I think about Playwork, I wonder actually whether Playwork is even a good fit for children's museums if we're really focused on the learning aspects itself. So as I say all this, I'm still questioning it. I'm constantly questioning whether it's going to be a good fit. And there's this kind of spectrum of play, right? So you're thinking about everything from the free play where it's what I'm doing when nobody else is telling me what to do. They're just doing whatever they want to be doing at that moment. There's adult-led play where you might have a school visit, and today we're going to make a roller coaster, and can you do it using these materials? Can you use these foam insulating pieces to put marbles through and make a roller coaster? In the middle, there's adult influence play, which is where I think most children's museums end up. So we've set up spaces, we've set up exhibits, we've set up a grocery store, and it's very rare to see a kid use the farmer's market as anything other than a farmer's market. Maybe not always, but for the most part, they're going to do that. And the adults around them are going to encourage them to, all right, honey, we're going to go shopping. What do we want to buy? And those conversations are happening. For me, the big question is I think about Playwork, and I ended up getting my master's in Playwork. So I had worked in children's museums for years and discovered this thing, and it kind of remapped my brain and how I was thinking about not always looking for the teachable moment with kids, because sometimes that felt like that was more about me. I'm trying to feel successful. And if I've taught kids at the end of a school program about money, focusing on money, if they know what a dime is, I feel successful. But actually the stuff that I loved was stuff that was completely unscripted, the things where kids really surprised me. So I'm going to kind of finish up here by talking about some of the things that we did as we introduced Playwork to our museum. And then I want to open it up to some discussion about those things. And when I'm introducing what we did to introduce Playwork, I'm also introducing a little bit about what the practice looks like on a day-to-day basis at the museum. I started at the museum in 2013, and I didn't start working with the floor staff. I mean, I work in exhibitions, so it's very unusual for someone in a museum, at least from my experience, that's the head of exhibitions to also manage the floor staff. Funny coincidence, the floor staff need to be managed by someone in this intermediate times that they were given for me to work with. And I, little by little, started making a few changes. And one of the things we did was we moved away from resetting. So, for instance, this is an installation called Desert Derby by Roma de Salvo. And there are these little wooden cars that you can roll around an undulating track. And I told the museum guides, they weren't called playworkers then, that if a car goes out, they can let the car go where it goes. There is a tipping point. So if there are no cars in the car exhibit, is it still a car exhibit? Right? It's very philosophical. But that's interesting. So with our staff, we just said, don't worry about going and resetting. Don't worry about, you don't have to go in there and put the cars back on the track. The cars can go where the cars go. You have the adult influence. Parents often are trying to teach their kids to clean up and leave things in the correct area. So we don't intervene. If a parent wants to keep something in a specific area, they can. Sometimes we'll tell them, whisper to them, it's okay if you want to take the car with you to the next exhibit, which is often a big relief for a lot of parents who have to wrest these cars from their toddlers' gripping hands, but it's not that big a deal. So we started off with that. And the other big thing we did was we moved away from lines. So in the past, an installation like this is called Fruit of the Gods by Friends With You. I know our museum is weird too, so it's kind of funny to see these installations, but this is a inflatable sculpture, and you can go inside it and jump around on the middle. And before, there was a museum guide who would stand out there and count kids in, give them 2 minutes in, and then they'd say, time's up, next group in. So we just stopped doing it, and it worked out fine. And for us, it was an exercise in allowing kids to know how long is long enough to be in that space, to be able to look in and say, I think there's too many big kids in there. I don't want to go in there right now. And it allowed us then to observe and think, okay, well, maybe we need another space. The little babies don't seem to want to go in there at all. They just want to have a space to just bounce up and down. So could we add more mats on the outside where adults could hang out with the babies while the older kids are in that space? So speaking of observations, that was a big thing that we introduced, because I really wanted the play workers, well, the museum guides at that point, to watch and observe and not try to drive the behavior of children and their adults in any particular direction. So this, what you're seeing on the screen, comes from design thinking. And I find it a helpful way to just look at what's happening around you. So you stop and you say, well, what's happening? So this, in the case, this is the photo. But if you were looking in the museum, what is happening? A female child, 3 years old, is picking up tomatoes and putting them in a basket. You know, how is she doing it? She seems very serious. I think her face looks serious. She seems to be trying to get all the tomatoes. She wants to get just tomatoes. She doesn't want to get anything else. And then you make, at the end, some guesses about why she might be doing what she's doing. And maybe that gives you some insight, maybe it doesn't, but it's just training you to really be in the moment and not necessarily thinking about how you might then get in and talk about the nutritional value of tomatoes or something like that. The fourth thing we did is we began daily and weekly reflective practice, which I believe you're doing now. And this whole process of this training is also a reflective practice. So stopping and thinking what happened today. And typically in children's museums, you have maybe 10 minutes at the end of the day or less where it's just like, hey, this thing broke. Bye, see you later, you know? And you maybe make some report of that. And so when our groups now meet together, there's a half an hour at the end of every day, and they reflect on a few things. They reflect in action while they're out on the floor. What am I doing? How am I doing it? When they come back together, they reflect on actions that they took. They reflect on actions that they did not take. You know, so for example, in one of our spaces, I sound like a crazy person when I talk about the spaces in the museum, so just bear with me, but it's a room full of mattresses. Mattresses cover the floor, they cover the walls, and in it are 160 fabric tires that are about the size of car tires. And so you can stack them on your body, you can throw them, you can pile them up. And there's a place where you can get up pretty high and jump into the pile of tires. So in one of our huddles, one of the play workers brought up that a kid was on the top of this ledge and he kept saying, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna commit suicide. And he kept saying it over and over. And it was right after Anthony Bourdain had died, and there was a couple other suicides that were pretty prominent in the news. And so the play worker watched this, and her first impulse was to say, hey, don't talk like that. But instead, she just observed and watched and paid attention to what was happening to make sure that, you know, he wasn't actually threatening to kill himself. He was doing it in as-if behavior. But she then checked in with adults who were nearby just to make sure they were okay, because it could be something that would be very triggering. And I also apologize for bringing it up in the context of the group without giving you warning. But that's what happens in the reflective practice at the end of the day. We also talk about, and a tire got a hole in it, you know, those other things that are practical. But we work through these things, and then we also think, what is it that made me react the way that I reacted, and how might that shift the next time I'm in a situation like that? And then we introduced a risk-benefit assessment. So this is thinking about, why might we want to do something? So let's say you think about adding a little pop-up adventure playground of cardboard boxes and sheets in the middle of some space somewhere. So you think, well, what are the benefits of this? Well, it might give a space for kids to build together. It's very open in the space, and we want a little hidey hole so that kids can be hidden from view. So then you go through some of the risks, and you think, well, you could get like a paper cut, or if we add in scissors, somebody could cut themselves. So you go, it's basically what we do sort of naturally, but we start really with the benefits. This is an example of if you were to do a risk-benefit assessment with karaoke. So imagine you're going to set up a karaoke section at your museum. It doesn't seem like something that's very risky, but it's something that's emotionally pretty risky. So you think about the benefits, well, okay, kids and adults could develop their singing. They could show off a little bit. They could show off some ability. It would be fun. Kids could try on adult culture. Karaoke might be something that they've heard of before and they've never tried themselves. They could develop confidence, etc. The hazards are you might sing really badly. You might not be able to sing, and you then can't really participate. You don't want to participate. You might move awkwardly, which sounds like something would happen to me when I was a kid. You might start to cry. So you work through all these things sometimes as a group, as the play workers together, and you're also then becoming more sensitive to each other. Because if I point out that I'm afraid that the hazard might be moving awkwardly. I'm also telling you a little bit about my awkward teenage self, in doing that. And so then you go into what are the safety measures that you can put in place. A safety measure might be that one of the play workers has to get up there and on purpose make a fool of themselves to make people feel a little bit better. You might need to hang out with a kid who has had sort of a difficult karaoke time. All this stuff is a way of taking the intuitive nature of working with children when you really love children and respect children and putting it, kind of encoding it in a way so that you can transfer it and share it with others. So all these changes, these little changes, doing more observations, allowing for a little bit more risk, then led into things that were really kid driven. A kid invented this whole thing that we call the spy game. And they started hiding things all over the museum. And they had pieces of masking tape. They wanted to write their names down, their spy names somewhere. So we started putting colored masking tape on a pole somewhere in the museum that was kind of hidden. And these kids started coming back again and again. And a lot of them were older. So you see this picture, there's a good range. The kid in the white sweatshirt on the left is Agent Rainbow Sprinkles. And she had said that she was pretty much done with the museum. She was too old. It felt like it was for babies. But she started coming every Saturday, and she just wanted to hang out with Catherine, who's the play worker. That's not a real bird on her shoulder. It's a fake bird in the middle. And she started to just say, like, hey, I want to help clean. And so she'd go and she'd just hang out with the play workers and help clean the clay studio. It was just very open-ended. And I think it became from the ship. This is Jill on the right, who's still a play worker with us and has been here for now 3-4 years. And it's a mechanism for developing relationships with kids that are beyond the kind of transactional. These are kids who come pretty regularly. That's Hannah, who's still a play worker with us. It's really hard to explain until you actually see it, what play work feels like. This kid, Ethan, he's been coming since he was a baby. His little brother, Alexander, is in the car seat on the far right. But they come and they ask for the play workers by name. They want to know what their schedules are so they can come hang out with them. We have the lockers. This is an old picture. We've changed the space since. But we took one of the lockers and made it a secret locker. And we took the combination lock that I had from my house. Like it has like my own personal combination on it and everything. And we locked it up with that. And so the kids know the combination of that locker so they can go and get into it whenever they want. So it's just opened up a lot of possibilities. There was a family who's military family, San Diego, big military town. So we have a lot of families who come in and will only be here for a couple of years. And this one family wrote this to Agent Kit Kat, who's Catherine, and he dictated this. This is not his actual writing, but my first mission of level 12 is to send another agent a compliment. I want to tell you that I like your smiles because that's how we met. It's very sweet. The long story short is I Googled Masters in Play because I decided that that's what I really wanted to study. And somehow magically, the perfect graduate program showed up. I studied at the University of Gloucestershire, and that's like the Taylor of Gloucester, like Beatrix Potter, Gloucestershire, Gloucestershire. And it's a distance learning program. So I went to England only a couple times and everything else was research based. And I had two professors who just changed my life. One of them who was Stuart Lester, who passed away a couple of years ago. It was not expensive too. I think that when I was doing, I think it costs about $20,000 now US dollars for a graduate program, and you end with a full master's. I worked through the whole time, so it took me about 4 years. But I highly recommend it. It's not called the Masters in Play and Playwork anymore. It's a Masters in Professional Studies of Children's Play. Children's museums could be places where adults get a much needed break. And for things like monitoring the lines, I remember an adult saying after they were in the sandbox and this kid was kind of grumbling with another kid. And the parent said, I don't feel like parenting today, let's go. So We're sensitive to that, and especially for adults who want a very Instagrammable, cute experience, and they want everything in their place. So what's made it possible for us to move away from resetting is to have fewer spaces that really require resetting to be functional. I know I have a colleague who just went to the Las Vegas Children's Museum, and she said that they had two volunteers in the grocery store exhibit that were constantly picking things up and putting them back up on the shelf, which to me seems like an art installation in itself, some sort of like Sisyphean task of constantly having to do that. We have a little bit of an advantage because we change over our exhibits pretty regularly. We're on an exhibition model, and so installations come and go. I think some parents will still take it upon themselves to reset something because that's how they want it to look. But for the most part, people have gotten used to it. And one of the things that I hear is adults will talk to other adults, kind of share what we're doing with the next person. They're like, oh, well, yeah, no, that they can take that wherever they want. Yeah, it's cool. No, we took the car down to the sketch aquarium and it was fun, and he rolled it around. I think that they're adults start to realize there are some advantages to it. So we had a space, actually, I think I can show you this space. We introduced a space in the very center of the museum. The first thing you saw that was cardboard boxes and ropes and sheets and literal trash. Like sometimes somebody put their like Weight Watchers TV dinner package in there, and that was really tricky because kids thought it was beautiful. Kids were really into it. This is in the image, you can see kids have created a zip line where they're rolling themselves across on these like wheeled wooden pieces that we'd made. The problem was that it looked messy to people who had just paid admission. So they came in and they said, I just paid, I think we were $12 at the time. I paid $12 to play with trash. So there is a little bit, and if you think about Playwork as preserving spaces for children's play, in the future, if we have a space like this, it's not on view right now, we're going to have it in a separate room so that you kind of choose to go into it and you kind of know what you're getting into when you're there. Because otherwise there was a lot of complaints, not just from our visitors, but there were complaints from, board members, because some of them got it and some of them didn't. And some of them thought that it just looked too messy. Mattresses and coffee don't mix. There are a couple of spaces where if somebody has coffee, we'll immediately step in and be like, hey, if you need to have coffee, that's fine. Just don't put it right here where kids are bouncing on mattresses and where it's going to go fall onto the coffee. And the other day we had a party. We have an annual family party called Pajama Jam. And everybody comes in their pajamas and it's at night and there's beer and wine for the adults and lots of juice boxes for the kids. And I came by and I was there with my family, my whole extended family, but I'm here, you're still working when you're at the museum. And so I see somebody's beer on the top of the bench right by the mattress. And I came over and I was like, is this anybody's beer? I'm just going to put it over here so it doesn't fall into the mattresses. And the guy there was like, oh, I don't know who that's some guy, some tall guy who just came in and put it there. A minute later, my tall brother comes out and is like, dude, where's my beer? But yeah, so as far as food and drink goes, we've loosened up a lot on coffee. We're trying to trust adults not to put them on the mattresses and things like that. As far as snacking goes, sometimes if it's fruit, we don't intervene as much. If it's anything nut-based, we do. Just because, and we explain, oh, if you need a snack, you can go over here. If any of these crumbs get in, a baby could get a hold of this and a baby might have celiac disease, because that's a real concern for us. Or, sometimes I'll see people eating like a whole bag of peanuts. I'm just like, really? Why? So those are the things that we'll intervene on, but it's also it's benefit of the doubt. Now that's also tricky because every person is going to be different. So I might let one family pass with having a snack nearby, but then, if another staff member deems that it's not okay, then they're getting mixed messages. A lot of it relies on the judgment of individuals. And so I, as a supervisor, as the manager of this team of people, I have to go into it knowing that mistakes are going to be made. We're going to use the wrong judgment in a certain situation because I know I do it myself. So you have to have a lot of trust both in the visitors, both kids and adults, and as well as in the staff. The long story short about the staff who had been working at the museum when I started managing them, many of them came in with backgrounds in art history, and they were really excited about talking about the art. That's really what they wanted to focus on. And they don't, and not to say that they didn't like kids, but that's really their motivation. They wanted to be, curators. So almost all of them ended up quitting, except for a couple, which at first I had a moment of thinking, oh my God, what am I doing? This is terrible. But the people who ended up staying, it was really interesting. One of them was somebody who really wants to be a curator, and she kind of worked it through. And she wrote me a letter recently. She's at Bard at the graduate school, and she said that what she learned as a play worker has been incredibly helpful in her eye as a curator and what she's able to see and what she's able to notice and to be more visitor focused. So that's a little bit of a light for me, but it's something that's very different. And that's why I try to introduce it slowly, little by little, without going and saying we're going to change all the rules, partly for our visitors, because I didn't want to disrupt them so much that they run screaming. For visitors, I mean, since we introduced Playwork and we introduced the Wonder Sound, we've had a 40% increase in attendance, which is insane. And it's not just Playwork and it's not just the installations. There's a lot of things that have been happening, but our membership has grown by 60%. It's insane. So that's been good. So now when we bring people on, we are really looking for people who are flexible, who will often do interviews with new potential staff on the floor. So we'll find a somewhat quiet space in the corner of the museum because that's the job. You're out there having conversations, sometimes that are relatively serious conversations about the work while you're in the middle of everything else that's happening. For training, now we've been able to introduce something new. So Hannah and Jill and Arthur are three play workers who Hannah's been here consecutively the longest. The next is Jill, and we've made them senior play workers. So now as new staff come in, they shadow the senior play workers. They also shadow me. So I go on the floor and they'll shadow me for at least a couple hours so I can kind of say, here's what I'm thinking about. And when I'm watching this kid climb this rope, here are the things that I'm thinking about and wondering about and where to intervene and where not to intervene. So there's a lot of shadowing. There's about 25 hours of shadowing when you first come on as a staff. And that's because play work is something that you learn from being around other people. Just like I said, you can look at everything that I just talked about and say, okay, we'll do risk benefit assessments and we'll do reflective practice. But you develop a culture of play work for your own institution. And then it's like this little flame that you then keep kindling and passing on to the next person. So that's how we've done it. So it's a lot of shadowing. We meet every other week during the school year, and we meet once a week during the summer. Sometimes we'll do our trainings are responsive. So in the huddle book, so that every day at the end, the staff will have that reflective time, but they make notes. And then I read it along with Diana, who's the coordinator of the program. And we'll see, it looks like there's been some issues around this, or rough and tumble play. When we introduced the mattress room, we had a lot of conversations about rough and tumble play and how to identify when it's turning from play into aggression. So we developed a training specifically about that and then did that training the next week as a group. So it's very, I want to say it's improvisational, but I don't want to make it seem like it's flippant, but we're basing it off of the needs of the play workers. I'm like the play worker for the play workers, trying to create a space that's conducive to maybe not their own play, but their own development as staff members. A lot of on-the-job training, and then some theoretical stuff. It's theory and practice, practice and theory, going back and forth constantly. what were our intentions for the day? Because in the morning we'll kind of set an intention, which I know sounds very yoga, but it's a way for us to communicate with each other. Like, I'm still getting over that cold. I'm 80%, but I'm feeling a little low energy today, right? So my intention today is to be as present as I can while still making sure that I'm drinking a lot of water and taking care of myself. So it's that kind of thing. And then at the end of the day, you can look back and you can say, okay, well, what did we notice about ourselves? What did we notice? Sometimes there'll be a story that somebody's written down, or we have a lot of school visits, as I imagine maybe you do too. And those 100 preschoolers that came in, it was really interesting how they changed the space. And so then the senior play workers would ask each other, and this is really important for us, you as a group, to be saying, well, what was it about that made you say that? Or what did you see that made you think that? Or how were you feeling when that happened? And those are the kind of questions that we ask each other, because then we go deeper and deeper versus just the surface of it. And it's difficult. Like, we've gotten into a lot of conversations about one of the huddles. Somebody noticed that there was, we have a costume area, dress up area, and a boy had worn some high heels and a dress. And they could hear a male caregiver with that boy saying, do you want to wear that? No, come on, let's wear something different. And the play workers' instinct was they wanted to go and say, no, it's okay, he can wear that, but also wanted to respect the caregiver's authority and needs, right? So you start to work through some of those things. Where are there changes that we'd want to make in the space that would allow for more different types of expression? You have to respect the caregiver and how the caregiver wants to parent in that moment. I'm a student of this. I don't, I've been thinking about it a lot, but I don't profess to know any more than anybody else. And so if you choose to adopt some form of this, it's going to be your own version, and you'll take it into the world in your own way.